Melmoth, which ran between issues 139 and 150, only deserves a brief mention. Story-wise, it has almost nothing to do with the overall narrative. It simply catalogs the final days and death of Oscar Wilde. The real Oscar Wilde, not the fictional version Sim used during Jaka Story. To suggest it has no merit is a touch too dismissive. It maintains the standard that Sim and Gerhard established during Jaka Story. However, critically speaking, it's a self-contained interlude that is a curiosity more than anything. At the time of publication, one could read this segment as foreshadowing concerning the eventual death of Cerebus, because on a first read, one has to wonder what one sequence of events has to do with the other. One has to ask, why is Oscar Wilde, the real Oscar Wilde, dying in this comic book? After all, there doesn't seem to be any obvious character parallels one could draw between Wilde and Cerebus. At best, one could suggest both Cerebus and Wilde are mostly inactive, for entirely different reasons, waiting for an end to arrive. Wilde slips into a state of incoherency and slowly expires, while Cerebus stares vacantly, unaware of anything happening around him. Both on some level accept their fate, so there is a vague connection one can make between the two. Regardless, without the benefit of hindsight, this reads as an odd, unrelated segue. However, for Cerebus the series, it's possible this portion was intended to indicate that death was forthcoming. Death as an allusion to impending change, that is. The forthcoming chapter, Mothers and Daughters, is where that change will occur, and it will be quite dramatic. Narratively, there are bits and pieces of Cerebus sitting at a cafe, nearly comatose, clutching Jaka's doll, Missy. Characters such as Booba, Prince Mick, and Keefe wander past and have brief interactions with Cerebus. Archbishop Posey, one of Cerebus's most loyal followers, is captured and sentenced to hard labor. Everything happens in passing, with Cerebus barely acknowledging these people. So again, an indication that life is passing Cerebus by and something needs to change. Understandably, Sim may have wanted to take a breather after Jaka Story. It may have been a narrative pause he planned when he was plotting the story. Unfortunately, the creative choice to examine Wilde's demise reads like unrelated padding. For whatever reason, this is a story Sim wanted to tell, and he told it, without any consideration to the overall narrative or the reader's patience. Again, from a story point of view, allowing events to calm down somewhat before escalating them again makes dramatic sense, especially considering the next chapter is a whirlwind of activity. As a counterpoint to one another, it is effective. However, this is a deviation that seems a bit perplexing, since there were other aspects of the story he could have examined in the meantime. It's a missed opportunity to set up the major story elements and characters that would come into play during Mothers and Daughters, or to elaborate on and fill out the details of the Cyrenist occupation. Certainly, some of this is touched upon, but only in passing. Nowadays, one can skim this story or read it all at once if one is so inclined, so the gap it represents in the story is rather diminished. However, at the time, Melmoth was a real-time, year-long pause where the character sat in a chair and stared vacantly. It tested a reader's patience. Partially, it seemed like Sim was declaring, "This is my comic and I will do what I want, and you either like it or you don't. Either way, this is how it is now." Moving behind the scenes. In issue 140, Dave Sim clarifies that he is not a feminist. At that time, in 1990, it was not unusual for the feminist movement to receive criticism for how it had evolved. So Sim's clarification didn't really stand out as problematic. Naturally, looking back, one starts to see how the infamous Reads portion of the series was in development before its publication. Periodically, in the note from the president, Sim will continue to make his case against feminism. The pattern, for lack of a better term, that will lead to Reads is starting to emerge. However, it all takes place off-panel, so to speak. That is, it fits into the separating the art from the artist category. There's no obvious indication this position will bleed into the narrative of the comic. It's simply one guy with a platform making observations. In fact, one could look at these statements within the context of the social climate as somewhat tame. Or possibly the opinion of someone who's exploring the pitfalls of a fascist matriarchy within his art. After all, as a responsible writer, one has to examine a subject from all angles. And naturally, an opinion develops, regardless of artistic intent. Then to purge these opinions so they don't affect the art, or to simply document his first draft thoughts, Sim wrote them out. It was difficult to see them as fully realized opinions that would, eventually, become part of the overall narrative. Strictly going from my own memory, so take it at face value. It was around this time that pundits, notably Rush Limbaugh, were criticizing what they perceived as the pitfalls of a liberal society, feminism being one frequently used talking point. The point being, these discussions were starting to emerge in popular culture. So that being reflected in an opinion piece by the creator of a comic didn't seem unusual or indicative of anything. Sim's note from the president was always where he babbled about what was on his mind at the time. To use a modern analogy, it was his blog. Again, using hindsight and context, this seems like foreshadowing of where the series will develop. Specifically, once the series effectively concludes with issue 200, and Sim starts to overtly explore these opinions within the comic. Put another way, Sim is indirectly preparing the audience for where he intends to take the series. I don't think this was a conscious choice on his part. I think it happened accidentally. Still, off-panel, it becomes obvious that feminism is on his mind frequently. Alright, I have to, expand this video a little further to hit a certain runtime, or this lovely platform will ignore suggesting this video to anyone. So please indulge me while I babble for a minute or so to avoid being punished by the algorithm. In my opinion, Melmoth is the first indication that the overall plot for the series may have been worked out in the very early 80s, but it was always in flux. There may have been a grand design, but it was a very rough sketch. The specifics were broad strokes, many details were ambiguous, and it was definitely subject to the whims of the creator, Dave Sim. I think this becomes rather apparent after issue 200, but the non-sequitur nature of Melmoth seems to indicate that too. I really get the impression he became fascinated with the tragic ending of Wilde's life, and it was inserted into Cerebus for no other reason. Also, I don't find it especially insightful. To give that a bit of context, I've read Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and that emotionally wiped me out for a week. I read Melmoth, and it feels a bit distant and analytical, like an essay. It just doesn't connect with me. Perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps there is some thematic or emotional thread I'm simply overlooking. If there is, please let me know in the comments. All that's left to say is thank you for watching, or listening, whatever the case may be. Additional thanks to all my fine supporters on YouTube and Patreon. I'm still struggling to hit my goal of being able to do this full time, and possibly to do longer or more videos per week. So if you can help, please do. Extra special thanks to Phil Sagan, Edward Clayton Andrews, Corey Drew, Alexa Zernish, Brian Deaton, Johnny Lim, Steve White, Taylor Dull, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient. Hey look, a playlist. Check it out for a variety of fine video products. Until next time.